a lot of those innovations led us to be very quickly the #1 in the world, and then ultimately we got to the point where Buttercard was basically doing 50% of the world's turnover in the barter industry. So even though there were 700 at its peak, I think about 700 or 800 barter companies just in North America alone, gives you sort of a scale of how successful that business really was. And at our peak we operated 136 offices in 20 countries, and in many countries, including Australia and New Zealand, we were considered to be the industry basically. During the course of building the company, I was personally responsible initially for selling franchises here in Australia and then ultimately for international licensing. And as I travelled around the world, I became increasingly aware and then increasingly disturbed by what I was seeing we were physically doing to the planet. I saw lakes with no water in them. I saw rivers that had run dry. I saw coral reefs that had no life and no coral, which is graveyards basically. I saw pollution beyond my worst nightmares. Just so many things. It was just increasingly disturbing to me. And then everywhere I went, I saw this monumental impact we were having. You know, the traffic everywhere you go, the airports, the aircraft taking off all the time, and I just thought, surely the planet can't sustain all this. I mean, surely I'm not the only one seeing this. And so I started to study it, and I came across in the late 80s a NASA report to the US Senate from early 80s, I believe it was, and basically that was, sorry, late 90s I should say. So and the report was from the 80s, and it predicted the thermohaline shutdown of the North Atlantic Ocean within 100 or 200 years. Now, not only is that a very disturbing prospect because it's basically the premise that it's the day after tomorrow movie, but just reading about it was like Armageddon, and it was a very scientific report, and you really had to understand science in order to be able to read it. And at that time, the US Senate, their Senate committee hearings were on the internet. That was when I first come across the internet in the late 90s, and I listened to some of these Senate reports, and I thought, these people are insane. I mean, what are they not getting about this? They're worrying about jobs in some little ramshackle town in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, and here we are, with the planet just disintegrating before our very eyes. So I decided that I was getting increasingly feeling like I needed to get involved in this process. The turning point for me to get involved was Russia, New Year's Eve. We were supposed to go ice skating. It was minus 15 degrees. Blanket of snow about 1.5 metres deep everywhere. We had to go and borrow a snow machine so we can go and cut a path to the pond and then cut the ring so that we could skate on it. Brand new skates I got for Christmas in Russia. And when I was doing the snow machine, and when I got to the edge of the lake, it fell through the ice. The ice was not thick enough now it was thick enough to support the snow because it all came down and slowly built up over time, but it wasn't thick enough to support the weight of a human. Anyway, through Translator, I was able to ask this old Russian couple whose house we went to, because I fell into the water, right? So it was, it was minus 15 degrees and soaking wet. So they took me to this house and let me dry out. And I asked them if this was, you know, something unusual, and they said no, it's been happening more and more for the last 15 or 20 years. And it's because the earth is too warm during the summer, and by the time the first blanket of snow comes down, it acts like an insulator. And I just thought, this is it. I mean, I'm in northern Russia in the middle of nowhere, and something's changing. So I wrote a paper, and I decided then that I would try and get out of barter card and take it public, use that as an exit, or at least to provide myself with enough capital so I could embark on a program of doing some action. As I got more involved, I found more and more there were not too many entrepreneurs with real, true, big picture global entrepreneurial opportunity or ability, I should say. And so I thought, well, you know, someone's got to do it. Never, and at that point, I'd not seen any connection between a barter card and the environment. I didn't know anything about carbon trading. And it got to the stage where during the process of me trying to take the company public, and that was a big disaster in fact, but during that time I was so disturbed by what I was reading about the environmental changes and the lack of action that I actually stopped studying it for about 3 years, because I thought, well, I just can't, it's doing my head in. So I just had to stick to my plan. I knew I had to work out how to exit from this thing so that I could do what I needed to do. I set up the first company. It was called Stop Trashing Our Planet. Well, it still exists, but it hasn't really done anything yet. Underneath that, I formed another company called Sharpe's Ecological Impact Scale. And after I went, in 2006, I was invited by Prince of Wales to his launch for Accounting for Sustainability. And he basically, his scientific research over 3.5 years said that we were going to run out of all major resources within 80 years. And his premise was, well, the problem we've got is in accounting terms, there's no debit for what you take out of the planet. So in other words, the resources we dig up cost us nothing. I mean, the coal companies pay absolutely nothing for the resource. Oil companies pay absolutely nothing for the oil. It's only the cost of extraction, which is basically, if every one of us could have a retail outlet and we didn't have to pay for our stock, we only had to pay for the shop, we'd all be millionaires.
Exactly.
Right? So,
exactly.
if you look at it that way. So no wonder they make billions, and no wonder the Arabs spend it like water. And I live in London. My house is in Knightsbridge, and you see the vast amounts of money that they just waste on everything. They fly their cars over their wives and everything, and they just shop in Harrods all day, every day, just pissing money down the drain because it costs them nothing. So, but anyway, putting that aside. So what happened was, I developed a formula, and it's a formula that basically could analyse a company's accounts. Now, when I looked at the Prince of Wales program, I thought, first of all, fantastic, absolutely correct. We should account for what we take out of the planet. However, the way he was planning on doing it, which was changing the accounting principles, right? I thought, well, it's just not going to happen quick enough. 10, 15, 20 years it's going to take to get all these things ingrained. That's assuming you can get engagement on it. Sure. And you're going to make resistance all along the way. It's way too political. I thought, well, it's just not going to happen. It's got to be an easier way. So I went back to, I came back to Australia for Christmas. As it turned out, at the time I was single, and very single.
So how long ago was this?
This was in 2007. And came back to Australia and wrote and designed a formula. I did it on Christmas Day actually. And spent the whole Christmas morning. I had a lunch to go in the afternoon, but didn't have anything going on in the morning, and just was there on my own at home, and I just wrote this thing. Couldn't help it. Couldn't stop thinking about it. So that was Christmas 2006. So it was the beginning of 2007. The end result was I got invited to the UN Climate Change Conference in Bali, because by that time I'd taken that formula,
Yep.
put it into an algorithm, had it embedded in a software program, and turned it into a taxation formula.
Right.
And it was a debit credit tax basically, where the more damage you're doing to the environment, the more tax you pay, and if you were doing the right thing,
Yeah.
using a moderate level business as a mid-ground, like an accounting firm.
Yep.
If you're doing better than that, so you're planting trees for a living or doing something environmental,
Sure.
you'd get a credit up to 70% on your tax.
Okay. That's a real incentive.
Yeah. So one would assume that if you could have up to a 70% additional penalty
Yeah.
on your tax
Yeah.
as a business,
Yeah.
or up to a 70% penalty, then everyone in business would start to work out how to become more green,
Yeah.
or they would invest in different types of technologies, systems. Every property developer made sure they built a park,
Yeah.
whatever it takes.
Yeah.
This got the attention of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, who, as a result of that, I got invited to Bali. And it was the first year on climate change conference I went to. And the first day and of course, as an observer, as an NGO observer, basically, you can sit in on some of the sessions, but I didn't bother. I went around, I was just gobsmacked at the science. I mean, hundreds of stands, all, bringing together into one place all the different ways in which we're damaging the environment of the planet beyond repair. And I was just gobsmacked. Anyway, during the course of the first evening, and Bali was a very social environment because of the nature where it is. Nusa Dua is like a little peninsula, and it's all 5-star hotels. So as a result, everyone could be very relaxed. There was a lot of networking, and so what that meant was that there was a lot of people sitting around the cocktail bars, beautiful weather, and it was just fabulous. So during the course of those evenings, people were talking about this carbon trading and the need for global exchange for carbon. And so I heard a lot of words that were familiar with me: exchange, trading, credits, and technology. And I thought, well, that sounds familiar. So I went off and just diverted myself away from what I had planned to do and studied the carbon trading issue, sat in on it, and within a couple of days I realised that what I had with Bartercard theoretically could convert straight over into a carbon trading platform. Initially I was looking to raise money to do that because it's a big project. The Bartercard software, here in Australia, for example, we process about between 70 and 90,000 transactions every month. We've got probably between 500 and 800 in-house users, plus thousands of clients accessing the network at any given time. So it's a pretty robust sort of software. There's a lot of money to convert that and a lot of time. What happened was that during the course of that time I got myself cashed up by selling out Bartercard Australia. I then decided that I would do it myself for a period of time, getting it up to a certain level. Then ultimately I had to put all of that on hold because of the global financial crisis.
So this brings us up to 2009.
Bartercard at that point went from being a very profitable venture before we went public to, at the beginning of the global financial crisis, we were losing $4.5 million a year. So I had to jump back into Bartercard, turn it around, sack most of the senior executives that were running the company across the board, took on 5 jobs. So I was, at that point I'd been non-executive chairman now, but I went back in as chairman, CEO, international sales manager, MD of the UK, and international licensing manager.
You don't do things by half.
So, and I've since turned the business around. It's now back profitable again.
Okay. So we need more people like you.
So, needless to say, carbon trade exchange and whole stop trashing our planet model had to go on hold. But at that point, the way I'd structured it is that Stop Trashing Our Planet was the parent company. It is a corporate entity in the UK. And its wholly owned subsidiaries were Carbon Trade Exchange and SEIS, or Sharpe's Ecological Impact Scale, which is the environmental software. So what I figured was, on the one hand, I could do the measurement, analysis and assessment, and then it could go across here and buy the credits from the exchange. Ultimately, too many people said, well, that's all too complex, it's too hard for investors to understand, so we decided to separate the two. So I literally parked the environmental software on the shelf where it still is, and focused on the carbon exchange side. Once I got, as soon as I got Bartercard back up and running, at that point I'd actually had to loan the company $2 million as well, Bartercard, and I also didn't get paid for a year. Sometimes being the major shareholder isn't a great thing. Even though I only own 50-odd%, just over 50% of the company, no one else was willing to fund it. So ultimately I got back to earning an income, and then I decided, you know what, in the meantime I got back engaged with the environmental side, and realised that in that time nothing had happened.
This is in 5 years basically.
And I was just gobsmacked, really. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. I mean, I'd written my paper on how close to the edge we were back in 2000, and here we were, coming on a decade later, and nothing had happened. So I decided to bite the bullet and devote a larger proportion of my time, even though I still, and today I still am CEO of Bartercard and International Sales Director. No longer MD of the UK.
Difficult to do here.
And so I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to have to bite the bullet. So I took the capital that I'd got from the sale of Bartercard Australia. We sold it as a management buyout, as a licensed operation, and I sold all my liquid assets and put it all into CTX. So I decided that I was struggling to find investors with the entrepreneurial vision and or even the vision full stop.
In this country or
Anywhere. And I was finding myself feeling increasingly insulted by their statements about, lack of success and everything else. It's like the glass was always half empty, and I thought, well, you know what, I'll come and see you when I've done it. And you can read about it in the paper, mate. So I just got sick of it, because what I was concerned about was that the opportunity to make a difference was getting more and more difficult to climb the mountain that we're continuously building before us in terms of doing something about it. In Bartercard we've traded over, it'll be close to $30 billion worth of trade we've done through Bartercard now. And that's $30 billion worth of economic activity that we've generated for businesses that they would never have had otherwise. It's new business, it's offset their cash expenses, and we've not only saved business, we've made businesses, we've created businesses, we've helped them develop, expand, and way beyond their normal capacity. So, some of the responses we got back from staff, we've also done very well, franchisees, and also from clients on our 20th anniversary, which is February 8th this year. Was pretty compelling, and it really put me back into the mindset of where we'd set out in the first place. And I'd always said in Bartercard that if we made sure that the buyer and the seller made a good deal, no one would mind if we got paid. If we focus on the best possible financial outcome for both parties in the transaction, then they'll be happy that we made a profit out of facilitating. because they're business people. You know, they don't expect you to do something for nothing. And business people don't mind paying for what they get if they get the best. So if they get the best service, they get the best systems, they get the best delivery, and also if you absolutely always deliver exactly what you say you'll do, which I've always done, to the best of my personal ability. Obviously, when you build a large company, it becomes increasingly difficult in a service business, particularly like Bartercard, to make sure that the people, you know, who are now probably, you know, 10th or 15th generation from when I was personally training the team. So in the carbon business, I decided a number of things. First of all, I didn't want to be dependent on so many people. Secondly, I wasn't so sure that I'd have the energy to do that, frankly. I mean, you know, it's exhausting teaching, training, recruiting and building, you know, lots and lots of people. Now, I know you've still got to have lots of people who are going to run a successful business, but, you know, at one point we had 3,500. That's a lot too many. At least 1 0 too many for me. So I decided, first of all, we had to make a web-based solution. Secondly, I decided it needed to be web-based because of the nature of the business market we're in today. You know, the next generation of business people and executives in companies coming through expect things to be web-based solutions. And when I looked at what was happening in the carbon markets, I was appalled at the absolute lack of technical capability, and it took me quite a long time to work out why. I mean, there's some pretty good reasons for it, but what I thought was the first thing we want to do is make sure we can do, again, one of the things I've done in Bartercard was make sure that they didn't have to re-engineer how they did business to interact with us. You know, we can swipe a non-cash transaction through your terminal in your restaurant. You know, you can do it on a regular deduction authority, the same as a bank payment to your suppliers. You know, you can do it by invoice and receipt. You can do a voucher. You can do it electronically. You can, you know, bid online for auctions, etc. Well, all of these things are what happens in the financial services industry anyway. Why not just duplicate it? Just because it's not cash doesn't mean we can't do it. Of course, that's $50 million worth of technical investment over 20 years to deliver that, to make it look easy. In Carbon Trade Exchange, I figured that we can build out the bells and whistles later. So when I realised that I was going to have to fund it myself, I stripped it right back to the bare bones and just delivered what the market really needed today, with a view that as we build it, we'll get more and more requests and demands from our client base, and we'll build the technology to suit the demands within the market and within the business community.
Which makes it also a very practical way to build it.
Yeah, and it means also I didn't need as much money up front. So instead of needing millions up front just for the technology, you know, I've spent more money now on marketing, branding and building a team than I have probably on the tech development. Not that it still cost me millions of dollars collectively, but the other thing is that I looked at, you know, in the industry generally, what's the flaws? Well, the over-the-counter market to me was unbelievable. I mean, and the methods that people were going about getting introduced as a buyer and a seller, to me it was just it was incredible. I mean, you know, Carbon Expo to me was like a modern day medieval marketplace with everyone bringing their chickens and goats along. You know, they're coming there with, you know, placards promoting forestry thing in Chile or something, or Brazil, and, you know, someone else has got a picture of a methane plant in Eastern Europe, and, you know, someone else over the other side is an investment bank saying, look what we do, we provide financing, and we do this and we do that. So really the buyers and sellers all go there, and then they hope they can try and work out a deal, and then they still have to try and do it remotely from the other side of the planet.
So let's not make it easy.
And so you know, I thought, well, we can certainly build something smarter and better than this. The reason why I focused on the voluntary market was a number of reasons. First of all, I had a look at the Chicago Climate Exchange and thought that model was about as flawed as it could get.
As flawed.
Flawed.
As.
In actual fact, what they'd really done, Chicago Climate Exchange, has done exactly what you do in a barter company, where you control how many credits are issued, who they're issued to, how they're issued, how the whole system's managed. You know, you appoint everyone who's in control of the currency. You know, the whole thing is completely controlled by the exchange.
Right.
Now, in that case, it sort of makes sense because it's a single currency, right? But in the carbon space, it shouldn't be. And in their case, their number one flaw was that.
Yeah.
I think, first of all, and secondly, that obviously they didn't have sufficiently robust environmental standards.
Right.
But the other point was that instead of focusing on their own internal standards, they tried to pretend they were regulated by hiring people to say we regulate them, where in actual fact all they did was check to see if they filled in the forms. And that is the part I disliked intensely. But the model I felt always was flawed. And obviously, even though they had a very large percentage of the marketplace, I was always concerned that it's not really third-party verified. And to me, you know, if I look at what we did again with Bartercard, is every business we checked to make sure that every company that came into the system was a legitimate business, that they could legitimately supply the goods and services, so we could give them a credit line, which we're giving them on behalf of everybody.
Sure.
So the credibility of the people in the system has a big bearing on the quality of it.
Sure.
So in the carbon space, with 20 years of Bartercard successes and failures under my belt, and you know, since we started, we've signed in 250,000 companies.
Okay.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. Yeah.
You know, I just thought, well, why would you want to make the same mistakes twice where you wouldn't? If I had my time over again, knowing what I know now, what would I do differently? Well, guess what? I'm having it over again. So this time I get to not make the mistakes. So the first thing we decided to do was make sure, for me, starting with the environmental side, it had to be a legitimate environmental offset credit. If it didn't, as far as I was concerned, I've never had any interest in trading EUA allowances. I just don't buy into it at all. Those allowances are given away. It's just bullshit, in my opinion. I just don't buy it. So, great. It doesn't mean I don't think a cap and trade or an ETS might be able to work. I just never believed in the methodology they use there, personally. Whether it does or doesn't ultimately have any positive impact on European carbon emissions, it's hard for me to say.
In other words, it's not measurable.
Well, there's debate over that, but that's not really the point. For me, what you can always measure is when someone has bought an environmental offset and retired it. That's measurable.
Yeah, sure.
Because the understanding of how the offset is created in the first place, and the carbon credit is simply a finance mechanism to get money from the people creating the problem to the people who are fixing it.
Yeah. Okay.
Simplifying all the bullshit, rhetoric and media hype aside, that's what a carbon credit's really all about.
Okay.
So I said, well, in the voluntary market, the advantage you've got, which is where I was looking very long-term window, is that it doesn't matter how many people have signed into the Kyoto Protocol.
No,
because it's not governed by that protocol. So if that contract falls on its arse next year in 2012, the voluntary market will continue. If that contract gets re-signed, in whatever form it takes, the voluntary market will continue. Also, that the regulated market, given that governments generally are pretty gutless when it comes to trying to fix this problem, the regulated market's only impacting, at the moment, around about 1% of global GDP. an even smaller percentage of companies.
Yeah.
So, what about the other 99%?
There's a market.
There's some sort of market. So I looked at, first of all, from an impact point of view, where could you make the most difference? Well, you know, in my view, the guys that have decided to come along and start trading EUA allowances did nothing. All they did was the financial services organisations that decided to add another product. They haven't done a damn thing environmental, nothing, zero. Companies that are trading CERs, again, what they're really doing is providing a service to major institutions who have to do it.
Yeah.
So they're not really creating a new market. They're not making any substantial difference in the global fight against climate change, in my view.
In other words, just another middleman in the process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, you know, that what we decided to do was go out, take what was the very embryonic phases of the global market. You know, it is still very much embryonic phases in financial terms.
Yeah.
The individual components of the market are extraordinarily well established. They're extremely professional. I mean, unbelievable. You know, the standards. I mean, considering that VCS, Verified Carbon Standard, has only been around for not even 5 years, I don't think, right? Yeah. I mean, their level of professionalism, the credibility of their credit systems, their methodologies, and the way that they go about approving new methodologies is unbelievable. Really, really top notch. You know, you put it up against the quality of any major financial institution in the world, in my view.
Yeah.
But they don't make any money. It's not for profit.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's...
They're here to. I mean, of course, they charge fees, but
beyond that.
The fees are just building that the whole system.
Yeah.
Gold Standard, same thing. You know, and now both of those organisations in recent times have hired professional CEOs, recognising the fact that they'd already outgrown their little grassroots environmental structure, which in both cases matured pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So the other thing which we decided to do was I wanted to have a registry system in place, and the reason to me for having the registry was twofold. One is I didn't want to have to employ a shitload of people to check every single credit to make sure that it was valid. And I thought I can just never make any money. You know, like it's just not financially viable. Which means I might be tempted not to do it. Which means I'm going to have a problem with credibility. So the only way to set it up, in my view, was to have a system in place that guaranteed that every credit was legitimate and guaranteed who was the legitimate owner of it. Now, luckily, the market decided to get into the environmental registry business, and they bought TZ1. Lance Ugler made that decision. And Lance did it because he's passionate as an environmentalist. I've met with him on numerous occasions, had long conversations with him and lunch a couple of times, and you know he's passionate about it. But he's built a large organisation which is not entrepreneurial. So once he came along with this deal and he delivered it and said, "We're doing this," they imposed market's ruthlessly rigid structure onto that new registry service. So there is no room for ifs or buts or maybes in their world because they can't. You know, in all their other businesses provide infrastructure, indices, document exchange services and stuff like this. All the major banks in the world. Now there's no way there could be any. There's no black. There's black and there's white. There's no grey.
There's no grey.
Right. So they have basically imposed those ethics and systems onto the environmental registry, which makes it rigid as hell. one of the other major registries, CDC in Europe, very similar, because they're French government owned, and they went about, first thing they did was went into the regulated market. I mean, you haven't heard a single peep about any problems on the French registry in all this other business that happened in other European countries. I realised that if we could link an interface with those companies, and I could build just the focus on the technology, we could do the best possible job on that, and not have to do the administrative burden that went with checking every single credit to make sure it was owned and that the issuance was done correctly, as long as we could be certain that they did. So that makes it virtually exactly the same as what happens in the share market, because the stock market only really checks a new issue, an IPO. Anything else, they rely on the registry. Once a company's already listed, they rely on the registry to monitor and confirm who owns what. Right? Now, so this is slightly different, of course, but that's the sort of general principle of it. Right? And then, of course, what I figured is, well, why do you need to use a third party for the financial clearance? Why can't we just build software that does that? And then I'll issue electronic instructions out to the banks, and they'll do what they do, banking. Move money from here to there. Here's the instruction, you do it. And so that's what we did. And interesting enough, at a recent launch with the Westpac interface, someone asked me a question and said, well, you say you're an exchange, but how are you different than any other registry? And I thought, well, I mean, we're so different, it's chalk and cheese. In fact, a new guy's just launched a new service down in Melbourne recently, an online, I don't know exactly what the hell they call it, but anyway, and they specifically said in their press release that they're not a registry and they're not an exchange. So really, I don't know what that makes them, but so in our case, we're not trying to be the registry. We know that. Now we've linked with American Carbon Registry. I hope we'll be linked with at least one other registry very soon. The link with Gold Standard is sort of like a secondary registration. But in short, my objective really right from the outset was to create a structure whereby we could maximise the volume that could go through without having to have massively deep pockets, without having to go on bended knee to JP Morgan and say, give me $50 million or I can't do this. Well, we don't need that. So the company's privately owned. It's owned by the executives, and I mean majority owned by me. But the rest of the shareholders are all directors, senior executives, or consultants who've assisted me in the early stages, particularly, and I gave them equity. Because in many cases I couldn't afford to pay them very much, so...
As long as they were willing to accept that was fine.
Exactly.
Okay, well that's... I mean, with the overall process, in terms of you've got one registry, another one to come on board, and you're looking at the gold standard as well.
Well, we've got American Carbon Registry and Market Link now.
So as this grows, will there be registries from independent countries, or you use those registries to keep the focus? Keep it.
There could be. I see that we've developed the infrastructure. It's like a central infrastructure for an exchange. We're capable of linking with any registry now. Just to put it in perspective, the link with Market took us a bit over 9 months to do. There were some in-house reasons at both ends why that took a little longer than it probably should have, but 9 months is a long time. The link with American Carbon Registry, who are less technically competent than Market by a long way, took 2 weeks. So once you've done it the first time, it's much easier
Because
after that.
You've got all that. Yeah. You can ask the right questions.
So we've been in discussion with 2 or 3 other registries around the world.
Right.
In those cases, though, I'm not yet sufficiently confident about the structure behind that registry and how they're bringing their credits together. And so one of my objectives in the next 6 months is to expand the number of registries we link with, but in order to do so, I'm going to have to physically go and do some due diligence on that registry to make sure it's really doing what they say they're doing. Now, if it's set up by a government, like the Australian government is looking to set up a registry, as are others, then I'll still be just as determined to make sure it's going to be, have the rigidity to it or the robustness of it, and that it's going to be technically capable of meeting demand. Because, there's no point saying we've got a registry and you've got, half a dozen people sitting around in an office with spreadsheets. I mean, that's,
They've got to have people out in the field actually seeing.
Jurassic Park, dinosaurs lumbering about.
Yeah, sure.
If that's the case, then they should outsource their registry services to someone who does it for a living and get a white label solution from Market or CDC or someone else, right? So, and the other reason why I might not link with some registries is whether I have confidence in the credit standard that they be trading. A good example is that of that is the Beijing Climate Exchange and Panda standard.
Why is that?
Well, in my opinion, it's doomed to fail. And the reason is because they have recreated the vertical integrated model that Chicago Climate Exchange had. So there's no third-party checks and balances. Everything is controlled through one group of companies, which all co-own everything. They own the standard, they own the registry, they own the exchange.
In other words,
no one's checking anybody.
We can make it what we like and make it to our benefits.
Well, so the point is, even if it starts off doing it correctly, which Chicago Climate Exchange may well have done. I wasn't there at the beginning, so I can't comment.
Sure.
But when you create your own standard and you control it, and then you're the registry for it and you're the exchange for it, who's checking the environmental credibility of the credits that are being produced? I mean, where exactly is that being done?
No.
Right. So now it becomes solely down to the ethics of the operators. That's it.
And if there's a lot of money involved.
Now, having said that, I built a barter exchange where there were no regulations around the world on how you did it. By being the most ethical and doing it absolutely correctly, we became the largest in the world. Maybe these guys will do the same thing. But my feeling is that in the carbon space, why would you do that? That's the part I don't get. I don't understand why they need to create their own credit standard. I don't.
Do you see that, because there's going to be more and more of these, do you see an overall body which is a set of rules, or do you find it like it's like having a reasonably unregulated in terms of you're telling everyone to do is better than having totally regulated?
It's funny, I was asked that question by a journalist only recently, and it is a bit of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, if there's too much regulation, the market will never reach maturity, because regulation can put it out of existence before you learn what to do right and what to do wrong.
So in other words, we've got to make some mistakes.
The way that was dealt with in the franchising industry in Australia, for example, and in the UK, was that they made it compulsory that you had to be a member of the Franchise Association. That association had to cast a set of rules which the government approved. So what they did was they outsourced the regulation, basically, because they said, well, otherwise what we do is we just build this big department that's going to come in and stifle the business and not let it grow. So whereas the association is there to develop the business and watch it grow, which makes the association stronger. So but they have to do it then with a set of guidelines, with a set of rules. So that sort of makes sense. So as a result, organisations like the International Emission Trading Association, IETA, Carbon Market Investors Association, which we're a member of, etc. I think that over time, those associations hopefully will start to develop some of that.
Sure.
I think in the meantime, if there was any regulation, the one that should most definitely be, in my view, is that there is no way that an exchange should have any financial interest, ownership or control over a credit standard, ever. Now, registry, I think, could possibly be controlled by the exchange, maybe. I don't think it's right, but it could be. But if the registry and the credit standard are the same, there's no check. You see that, so there's no question that the credit standard has to be separated from the exchange and the registry, in my view.
It's probably like in the Green Building Council, where you have your certifications external to the Green Building Council, and then you have more than one of them. So there's a bit of opportunity for people to say, well, I'd rather use them than them.
Yep.
So you keep your market open, so that you're allowing people to make choices.
Well, we've got 14 different credit standards that we can trade on our platform now.
Yeah.
That's a pretty broad range. Yeah. Through 2 different registries at the moment, which will ultimately soon be 3.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good variety.
Yeah,
And each one of them, I'm confident, they have different types and levels of environmental credibility, and they trade at different prices because of it.
Yeah. Which is what you pointed out initially. Yeah.
So we've got credits under the ISO standard that are only trading at like $2.
Right.
They're an older vintage, admittedly, but
Is it, okay? In that case, is there an incentive to obviously do whatever you need to do to make sure you create greater value as a credit maker?
Well, as someone who's originating credits, I think what's going to become increasingly obvious is that there's an informed risk investment reward decision to be taken at the beginning, but in some cases you may not have that option at your disposal. See, if you're building a wind farm, for example, right, and you're building in a third world country, you can choose. You could do anything from a CER all the way down to an ISO standard. Now, if a CER is trading at 13 or 14 euros, why the hell would you want to go and spend the time and money getting an ISO credit for that might sell for less than $5, right? 3 or 4 euros, right? So sure, it'll be quick and easy, but why would you bother when you've got such a big return that you can get out of making the investment at the other end? At best, you might say, well, I'll go for gold standard credit, which will trade at 10 euros, right? So therefore, okay, I've still got a good return on my investment without, going down market too far. However, if you're doing, biochar, which is, where they add, they get hay, and instead of just letting it rot, they add it to coal-fired power plants and change the mix. It needs less heat to burn, etc., produces less CO2. Well, that's probably one of the least value credits, because it also, as a business, it requires the least effort to do. And also there's more likelihood to be some question mark over, the boundaries in which it's measured and all that sort of stuff.
So you have basically...
So you might only, and if you're doing that, you might only be able to get an ISO credit. You see what I mean? Because now every one of these standards has the different project types, but being frank, some of those projects might not have quite the environmental credibility, or they wouldn't have the social aspect to it, like gold standard require that it's not only has a carbon offset value, but it also has a social value, and that's part of their program. So if you can't meet those requirements, so if you're doing energy reduction technologies in the centre of Sydney, you couldn't get one of their credits anyway. right?
So
You couldn't do it in Sydney anyway, but if it, say it was in Miami, right? And you're going to put some sort of energy reduction technology on an existing power plant. Well, there's no way you could generate a gold standard credit because there's no social aspect to that.
Sure. No, so I mean, what level? Okay, where do you start? Where can someone be involved in producing the credits? Is there sort of you have to be a certain size and capability, or can you do it like a cooperative credit?
Well, you can. One of the good things about the carbon farming initiative is they've recognised the ability to aggregate, as they call it, right? So there are plenty of companies out there already that do aggregation, but of course, usually they can be taking the project originators to the cleaners, right?
Yeah.
But
so
you get back what you can invest. I've seen projects in some of the standards that have been generating as little as maybe 5,000 tonnes a year worth of carbon offsets. If you're going to do a project like a CDM project, if you're not producing at least 100,000 tonnes, it just wouldn't be financially viable.
No, sure. No.
But there's a lot of other issues. Where you are will depend in some markets, in the voluntary market, on what return you get, what type of project you're doing, or return on. So there's a lot of variables. Now, getting back to what we do very differently. If you take the exchanges that I said before, they're just really a financial services organisation.
Yeah.
If we exclude their futures completely and just talk about the spot trading for CERs, it's one line of commodity. That's it, right? Bid, offer, last sell. That's it, right? In Carbon Trade Exchange, we have 220,000 different variables.
Right.
When you take the combination of all the different search parameters we present.
Right. That makes it. Yeah. So you have to have a pretty robust system to work properly.
So because you got 8 to 10 different vintages.
Yeah.
You've got 14 different credit standards.
Right.
You've got probably about 40 different project types within each one of those credit standards and within each one of those vintages.
Right.
Then you've got all the different countries of origin. Right. So there's 220,000 different possible combinations. That's before you even start talking about the different prices.
Right.
So this is why most of the exchanges around the world that are doing the regulated market have been able to use off-the-shelf software and just package it together. So they just go and buy the rights to use this software of existing suppliers like ICE as the clearance house, because they're only clearing one commodity, right? They can use this Trayport as the broker interface software. They don't have to build a web interface because the brokers will use Trayport for all their other commodities that they trade. So now they just add another
product.
Right? It's just one line, right, of data. Obviously it gets bigger when you start talking futures and all that sort of stuff. But we're talking 220,000 on spot trading.
Right, and futures will obviously go.
Well, we won't do futures.
No,
not in the near future. And with a market that complex, how the hell are you going to build a future anyway? I don't know how the hell you would price it, because which commodity are those 220,000 you're going to pick?
Yeah, if you're burning, because you're talking about providing the credits. Actually, from the point of view of the people buying the credits that are being sold, they're the ones that really are going to be the ones that are going to be looking at ways of actually creating their own credits in the long term.
Yeah, but if you think about this, a future is against a set. Usually, it's against a commodity, right?
Yeah.
So, because the voluntary market and carbon really, if you look at all the carbon market, it's not a commodity.
No.
Right. It might be a commodity product, but the actual carbon itself is not. It's more like a share,
Yeah.
right? So, you know, the only way really would be for someone to create a fund,
Yeah.
right? And you'd invest in a fund
Yeah.
rather than having, you know, a future, because the only way we'll be able to build a futures market would be if we've got a particular channel of a particular type of
Sure.
credit that has enough trading history to justify setting one up.
Yeah. But so at this point in time, it's keeping it as simple as possible. It's an in and out.
Yeah.
End of story.
Yep.
In terms of explaining to people generally, I mean, because everybody really does have an opportunity to be involved, but on the basis they probably create some cooperative arrangement to gather all their potential carbon credits together.
If you think about someone who wants to create carbon credits and sell them, right? And I mean, basically, this is why there's so much opportunity in the markets attached to this, because you've got this vast range of different marketplaces that are emerging business opportunities,
Sure.
and that's the whole idea of the carbon offset. That's the whole reason it exists, is to provide financial stimulation to new markets, in markets that are combating global warming. That's the whole purpose of its invention in the first place. So there's a limit to how small those will be able to get. But where people will get more advantage will be like an individual consumer. To originate credits, the only way they'll be able to do it is to invest with financial institutions or funds that are actually going to go and do those projects. Even if it's a collaborative, it's still going to require a bit of capital to do it. In a carbon farming initiative, a lot of those projects are not going to be that capital intensive, but you know, if they haven't got 10, 20, 30, 40, $50,000 worth of fees to pay for consultancy and accreditation and all that sort of process, it's not going to happen in the first place.
So what about where you're sort of looking at, like one of the issues I'd be looking at would be urban integration, where you're trying to change the way you develop spaces. You know, you're going to now have a development which is going to be every block going to be orientated the correct way. You're going to have integration where you're going to be allowing potential for growing food a lot more locally, so you're reducing your distribution costs. Do you see something like that being a possible means of creating offsets, given the fact that they can be big enough?
It could happen here eventually, but not at the moment, because at the moment the carbon farming initiative is only being allowed to produce credits in Australia for farming in indigenous communities, right? So if you don't meet the base criteria of where you come from, like as in physically where whatever your land or whatever is located, the only other way you can do it is to become accredited as an aggregator, or you can have a company that can co-benefit on someone else's land, which is expected to be quite a big thing in the indigenous community, because, you know, obviously for lots of reasons we don't need to bore ourselves with, that they are less endowed with the commercial skills to make those business models happen themselves. So and so plenty of farmers too, I might add. So the point is that what they're planning is that to allow third parties to have access to the rights to generate the carbon credits off someone else's land.
Because I'd be interested to see how something like that could...
But on the urban front, I think that'll be the next generation. I think if the current government can get in for another crack, I believe that the next thing is that then they'll start to expand that carbon origination program, because we'll see more benefits in the second phase commercially than we will in the first phase. The first phase is just going to be money going to, well, communities that need it anyway, right? Farming and indigenous communities that forever freaking, you know, bloody got the arse hanging out of their pants. So you know, I mean, and it's part of the reason they picked them, I'm sure. You know, it's low-hanging fruit, because who's going to say no? Let's not give the farmers any money. Let's not give the abos the opportunity to create a job. I mean, you know, so I think, you know, if but in reality they haven't allowed for very much technological development, which is really where you start to see industry spawning, right? I mean, obviously it's all well and good to say, well, you can have an agriculture industry that's going to go and plant trees and going to do this, but still, no matter how vigorous you get about planting trees and reforestation and everything, there's still a limit. The real big scale developments will be when you start to see mainstream investment into technological structures. Well, this global olivine is a great example. You know, I mean, zero waste, and produces 200 or 300 megawatts worth of energy out of garbage. You know, I mean, I saw another one, Zero Emissions Australia. I don't know if you saw that project. You know,
sort of involved with that.
And you know, there's plenty of people want to try and debunk the science of this geothermal solar, but the minute I saw it, I thought that's going to work. Someone said, "Oh, the problem is that liquid salt's really expensive to produce." Well, who gives a shit? You know, like, you got enough of unit. Who gives a shit? Compared to what? Compared to electricity or coal? And I mean, give me a break. You only put it in the system once, right? And then it just goes round and round and round.
No, but
and it's not like the salt's going to get used up. You just have to add a bit of water as it starts to evaporate a little bit. It's just ridiculous. And besides which, if you did that, you can't tell me that some smart cookie in one of the gazillions of smart-ass universities we've got in this country wouldn't invent a new liquid that would have better capacity for transmission of heat.
Well, the thing is, you've got to start a process before you can get the...
Exactly, and then you'll see innovation, improvement, and so forth. But, you know, the whole thing is, unfortunately, without the financial stimulus, which is... Look, let's face it, the UN have got access to some pretty smart people. You know, one would think that if they were smart enough to think of the idea of creating a carbon credit as a finance tool to assist in moving money from the developed world to the developing world, then we could work out how to do it from Sydney to friggin' Wollongong.
Yeah, exactly. Totally agree with you. It's seeing how, because there's a lot of misinformation in terms of trading carbon. I mean, why don't we trade in carbon dioxide? Well, this is not the issue. It's actually how we're transferring this, and there's an immense opportunity here to do a hell of a lot very quickly to be able to start setting things right. And
exactly. Well, look, part of the reason why I saw this as being the big kahuna and why I felt I wanted to engage with it was because if we took this to the nth degree, if every business had to be carbon neutral, we would solve the problem in 5 years, right? And the cost would be negligible. The reason being is that carbon footprint is assessed only. It's exactly the same as goods and services tax. It's only that in a good GST, net consumer pays, right? So the more you consume, the more you pay. So, well,
so what's happened?
A proper structure of taxing structure would just allow carbon neutrality for every business, pay a tax that's exorbitantly high on any emissions you net emit, or offset them. And if you offset them, the money goes to projects that are helping combat what's left of the problem, the unavoidable emissions.
So why is it so difficult for everybody to see?
You know, I think the biggest reason is media. It's irresponsible media. I think it's the biggest reason. I mean, you know, last week there was a front page story in the Sydney Morning Herald about a guy who committed carbon fraud here, right? Or he's accused of committing carbon fraud. And so he's selling carbon credits that don't exist. No one's ever planted any trees or whatever. So I rang the guy and said, well mate, I want to tell you about our story, because under our system that could never happen.
Yeah.
No story there.
Wasn't interested.
No story there, mate.
No, so
I mean, give me a break.
why am I not surprised?
So I mean, now this guy has written 3 stories about carbon fraud. Here's a system that ensures you cannot have that happen. It cannot happen. It just cannot happen. So if the people who, if the organisations and institutions who'd been buying credits off that guy, been buying them from us, they could absolutely 100% guarantee they would have got legitimate credits and paid exactly what they should have for them.
Are you sort of, well, I know you said you're training, but you sort of, is there going to be some part of what you're doing, a training, as in having some people who can actually legitimately go out and talk about what you're doing, and to clarify what is actually happening and what needs to happen? Or
Well, that part of it made me realise, and a few of the questions we've had in some of the seminars recently made me realise just how important it is to make it very, very clear. It's a bit like, you know, the guys who are running around selling engine shares, right? Yeah. Years ago in Australia. Yeah. I bought some. You know, Nirvana never quite appeared, funny enough. Right? Were they available on the stock market? No. Did I do my dough? Yes. Am I surprised?
Well,
I'm pissed off with myself for being an idiot.
Yeah.
You know, that's why Carbon Trade Exchange, that's why I designed it, because I was hearing all these stories and I thought, this is horrible. Like, this is just, it's part of the reason why the industry isn't growing, why the sector is not expanding. And it's what used to happen in the barter industry before I came along. And all of those dodgy operators, everyone, at one point here in Australia, there were 32 barter companies. Today there's 2. So you know, we just, they either went out of business, we put them out of business, or they couldn't compete, or in a couple of cases, the legitimate ones, we bought them out.
Sure.
Right? But the shonky guys just all couldn't survive. You know, they couldn't handle the pressure. We just set the bar too high.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that the education process, the most important one, I think, is to be able to have a brand by which people can have confidence of the origination of where they're buying the credits. No, we're not originating the credits. We're only the intermediary.
That's right, yeah.
But at least one of the things I set out to do, which is what I did with barter cards, you know, it's trademarked in all over the world, as is Carbon Trade Exchange. And you know, we just want to be able to have an industry standard, basically, where you can say, well, you know, if you bought your credits from that. So we've just signed a deal, which, depending on when this comes out, I will be able to officially tell you or not.
Probably at the end of May or thereabouts.
Okay, well in that case you'll be the first to know.
Okay.
We signed our first international license deal in Ireland.
Okay.
And it's going to be the co-sane exchange, powered by Carbon Trade Exchange.
Okay.
So they're not going to have any front, they're not going to have any back end. They're just going to have the front end portal. Everyone who joins and trades will trade through our technology. But they'll be their clients basically, but all trading through our technology. That's the first of our white label solutions. So the point of that is to guarantee the confidence that you've got one global exchange that's centralising and
so I mean, really what you've done is overcome all the objections.
Yeah.
Really. You've sat down because you've experienced with Bartercard and all the industry associated that you've now said, well, okay, well these are all the objections we're going to have. So if we can eliminate those, we shouldn't have a problem presenting something which is legit and everyone want to be a part of it.
Well, I spent 2.5 years on the due diligence, and a lot of that due diligence was finding out what people wanted, what they didn't want, what the problems were. So as you said, just get every one of the challenges, objections, and also what do they want? You know, how would they want? They want to be able to search this way. They want to be able to trade this way. You know, so we just basically said, well, you know, why don't we just build that? Now, luckily, because having been involved in developing exchanges, for 20 years,
you've got a lot of background.
it makes a lot easier to do that.
Yeah.
Now, that's one of the reasons why I believe a lot of the other exchanges have struggled or failed or not succeeded. Certainly not in the voluntary space,
Yeah.
because none of them have ever built an exchange.
No, sure.
Not even one. I mean, if you got someone from Munich Stock Exchange and you say, well, you go off and build this carbon exchange, all he can do is copy what someone else has done. How can he innovate and develop anything from scratch? I mean, the Munich Stock Exchange probably started before he was born.
Yeah. So you got to, as I say, you keep doing what you've always done. You always get what you always got. So you've started off with well, you've created something from scratch.
Yeah, but also utilising a combination of I went to all the major industry events around the world, sat down and talked with everybody in the industry, talked to the developers, talked to the originators, talked to the brokers, talked to the investment banks, talked to the companies that were buying credits, and those that were thinking about doing it.
Well, you've brought up just another point. You've really brought up this is what you've got to do if you want to start a business. I've got to do my due diligence. You've got to say, if you want to start a business, due diligence is such a major part of starting any business. So being there in itself is a lesson for anybody.
Yeah.
You might be considering starting any business.
Yeah.
So, and that's something that you've been very particular about, because you must have mentioned that probably about 15 times so far.
Yeah, well, and the reason is because also, sorry, I've got bloody some damn bit of fluff is driving me nuts here on the end of my. I can keep sitting on the end of my nose. Sorry.
Distraction.
I just keep coming across it.
Well, actually, I mean, you've really covered. All I was going to say was that anything we haven't covered so far, but I would like to see this as being an ongoing story as the whole thing develops. I mean, what you've given me so far really covers where you're passionate about, what got you to where you're going, and how you've done it, the importance of doing it the way you're doing it, and realising you started with something which is quite simple, because you didn't want to overcomplicate it, because it would involve a lot of additional costs which you don't want to have at the moment.
Well, not only that, also the problem is that until you've got clients in there, you might build features that are wasted. So it makes a lot more sense if you know what you're doing to develop it to the demand.
Yeah.
So now we're starting to get demand for reporting modules, and now we're getting demand for other things. There's some variations on, like at the moment, our minimum transaction is 100 tonnes, but if you list on the exchange for a partial sale, it can be anything over 100 tonnes up to how many of you listed, which can leave someone with an odd amount which they may not like. So, we're now going to have to build some options in there. We found that when we built the bid system, for example, it was quite difficult and lengthy time frame to bid against the existing inventory. So if someone wanted to just place a counter bid for price against the inventory that's already listed. So we're now building that to make it easy. They just have to click on it and it'll have a drop down and say they want to buy it, or they can counter bid for it.
So I mean, there are things there are always going to be new things which you can find out about, which will develop around the whole process.
Yeah.
So you're not depending on like, this is it.
Yeah. We're about to embark into the regulated market. Now we're in the process now of designing all the systems, methodology, the exchange that the registry, I should say, that we're engaging with. basically they tell me that the other exchanges are effectively what I would consider to be pseudo OTC exchanges. I mean, basically they complete an electronic trade, but to finish the process, they have to fax a piece of information off to the exchange, or the broker does, or they have to actually scan it and email it. So they have to get it signed and then sent.
So therefore yours is quite one clean path. Nothing can be interfered with the path. No possible.
Now, I don't know if we can be price competitive because I haven't got as deep a pockets as those guys, so I can't, and I don't want to be starting to charge people 20 and 30 and 40,000 euros to join our exchange. To me, even for a regulated trader, I would think 5 grand's my max. So I just don't want to charge any more than that.
Yeah.
And so what I've got to do is work out how to do it for that and still make money.
Yeah.
How to carry the trades on the small scale so that we get the bigger ones.
Yeah. Does it come down to a numbers game that you've got to be able to take a rather large chunk of the market to be able to effectively?
No, well, I've made sure I didn't do that because the point is you just don't know, right? I mean, in the voluntary market space, there's still hesitancy, there's resistance, there's brokers that have got incumbent positions in the market that are struggling to see why they should come onto the exchange. I mean, the reality is they're just doing a lot of work at the back end. They pretend to be independent, but really they're selling to the end consumer what they have in their inventory. They're not really selling them an option, right? And so I think that the risk some of those guys take is if they don't engage with us, they could end up out of business because basically their clients are going to find out who we are, they're going to talk to us, they're going to see that the broker decided not to engage with us and assume they're getting stitched up, and they'll say, well, bugger them, I'll just do it through you guys.
So just to sum it all off, what would be most helpful to you to make, besides all of what you've already done, if someone was to say, what could I say to somebody else to get them involved or be part of the carbon exchange?
I don't know if I really quite understood the question.
Well, it's sort of like, how would you get the message, to get the message out there so that, many people, one, know about carbon exchange, but also are willing to probably think of ways that they could be involved, or sort of thing.
Well, I think that we've intentionally lowered the price on the small business level. For example, €800.
Yeah.
It's not a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's over $1,000 Aussie, so it's not a huge amount. I think the most important thing is that everybody should insist that the people they buy from are carbon neutral.
Yeah.
I think that's the single most important thing. Whether they do it through us or someone else, I mean, we've just got to continue to offer the best solution, right? I think that should be mandatory. Every business owner should insist their suppliers are carbon neutral. They should be bloody carbon neutral, and every consumer should insist that the businesses they buy from are. As I pointed out, this morning we're flying down from Brisbane. My wife's reading some bloody Cosmopolitan or some women's magazine. I don't really know if it is Cosmopolitan, but anyway, one of those.
Yeah.
And I said, well, do you realise that 90% of those products won't exist in 20 years' time unless all of them start becoming carbon neutral? I said, if global resources continue to decline and global demand expands at the rate it is, the first thing to go will be fashion and cosmetics. Because they don't need them to survive. So they'll be the first thing gone, right? Entertainment won't be far behind, and guess what? That magazine is all three. So I said, if you want to keep your magazine,
be involved.
You better be involved.
Well, and that's that's true. I mean, so really, that puts it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
If you want some of the luxuries in life, you better get involved in this whole process.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it ain't going to be there.
No, that'll all be gone.
Okay, thanks very much.
No,
I
that's
appreciate
great.
that. We went more than an hour.